Caroline, over to you.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we hear you.
Yes, we can.
Caroline, finally.
So can you hear me, guys?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay, great.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Kabisa. Unajua kamera imeinama hivi. Sasa inaona juu.
I think, Davis, we are ready to get started. Let me just
Good to see you, Paulo Kumu. Welcome.
Thank you.
May I please request all the panelists to change from Flo's name, depending on which machine you're joining
This is Olamode.
with. Please rename so people know who's on the call. We currently have a number of Florence here who was. So kindly rename. We should be getting started very soon. Thank you everyone for joining, and thanks for your patience.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone.
We can hear you, but there's a bit of an echo.
Okay, so can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good. Good afternoon,
Much better.
everyone.
We can get started. Thank you.
Yes, good. I'm so sorry. So do we get started? Are we ready?
Yes, we are ready.
Okay. Good morning. Good afternoon. Good evening to you all from all parts of the world. My name is Caroline Isipedo, SDGs in Nigeria event. I want to thank you all for making out time to participate. This event is being put together by partners from Africa who are in the forefront of the sustainable development goals at the national level. The world continues to face critical challenges to the implementation of the SDGs. And the most vulnerable people and countries continue to suffer the most. This is including the countries in the global south. The global response thus far has not been ambitious enough. We are 5 years down the line, and with the failure of this came the global crisis, which is ravaging the world at the moment. The outbreak and the negative impact of the novel coronavirus is a clear sign of not meeting the SDGs, with particular reference to that of health. Also, the economic shutdown has affected lives and livelihoods, and as such, poverty is on the rise. The global south countries are more vulnerable given significant differences in their economic conditions, the lack of diversity in the formal economy, and the heavy reliance on external markets and sources of finance. The main objective of this event is to reflect on accelerating the SDGs implementation in the midst of this global crisis. We will be hearing the voices from the ground. This event has speakers and presenters from different continents of the world, all drawn from the global south, Africa, Asia, Europe, and Latin America. They will share experiences, reflections, and recommendations to advance sustainable development while leaving no one behind. So, ladies and gentlemen, without taking much of our time, I would like to call on my colleague, Florence Suevo, who will set the context for this event. Once again, I welcome you all. Florence, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all of you. We are very pleased, the SDG forums from Ghana, from Nigeria, and from Kenya to be co-hosting this very special event. As my previous speaker has alluded to, that of course we feel that the SDGs were lagging behind even just before this particular COVID pandemic, and especially so in the global south. And so today we have a panel of speakers who will be speaking on different topics, and we really are looking forward to having a very vibrant conversation on what is really happening, the scenarios within the global south, but more importantly, what could be the solutions moving forward. So this particular event, dubbed Accelerating SDG Implementation in the Midst of the Global Crisis, in the sidelines of the high-level political forum, we'll look at four main objectives. And the first objectives will be to unpack finance for development in relation to the global south. A lot of global south countries, and Africa included, we've alluded within this particular HLPF in terms of issues of domestic but also global financing that has had a very huge challenge within global south issues of SDG implementation. And then the second one will be to share best practices and local grown solutions in social, economic, and political engagement in the midst of COVID-19 pandemic. We'll have a panel that will speak about their country experiences from Africa, but also from Asia. We look forward also to having this very critical conversation on this, what's really happening, what are the best practices during this COVID pandemic, but also how our SDGs been accelerated at country level despite the ongoing crisis. The third objective will explore innovations around SDG financing, leaving no one behind. And so the various speakers of today's session will also highlight some of the very innovative implementation strategies that are going on at different countries. And so the objective is for us all to learn from one another, but also to take away what could be important for us at country level. And then the fourth will be to foster social accountability mechanisms for local citizens. We at national level, one of the most, our work or our focus at national level is really to ensure that there is social accountability that is grown from citizen-generated perspective. And so this particular event also looks forward to having those particular conversations. And so without further ado, I'd like to stop there and to really welcome all of you and to encourage as the event goes on, let's continuously pose our questions or reflections on the chat, and we will be able, Caroline and I will be able to list down whatever conversations that will be going on the chat and pass them on as the event goes on. And so this particular point, I'll pass on this moderation to Davis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Florence and Caroline, for setting the context for this particular meeting, and of course, outlining what the objectives are. We are hoping to really learn from all our distinguished guests and speakers today. And of course, we also warmly welcome the participation of all of you. Thank you so much for finding time to join us for this particular event. My name is Davis Adiano. I'm the Director of Programs at the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, which is a global network that brings to the over 260 partners, primarily concerned with how data can support the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. For this first panel, we are going to be discussing SDGs financing. And of course, amid the COVID-19 pandemic, so what we really hope to hear from our speakers is a bit of context before COVID-19 set in. What was the African perspective on financing for development? We'll also hear from Latin America before COVID-19, maybe briefly, what was the discussions around financing for development. And now that we have COVID-19, what are some of the challenges that they see? And of course, if they can also outline opportunities, because it's been sort of a double-edged sword. We've had some countries debts are being cancelled, others are renegotiating grants, others are getting grants to support the economies. So it would be nice to hear from all of you on this part panel, the different perspectives, and of course, any ideas you may have be useful to all the participants. We had invited Stefano Prato, who's the MD of SID, but unfortunately, something came up last minute. So sincere apologies from him. He's not going to be part of this panel. But we do have Paulo Kumo, who doesn't need any introduction to all of you, who's going to share his reflections on financing for development. And of course, we'll also have OEPC Olusei Babatunde, who's also quite active across the networks in the region and of course at the global level, who will give us some perspectives on FFD. And we'll also hear from Patricia Chavez, who will outline what their perspectives are from Latin America. And maybe Paulo Kumo, to start with you. You've been part of a lot of global level discussions, and of course, you also have your ear to the ground in the region. What is currently happening in the context of COVID-19? What are some of the mamas that you've had? And of course, just before COVID-19 set in, what were you seeing as some of the trends when it comes to financing for development? First to hear from you on that, I think that would be very useful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dennis. And Davis, I don't know why I'm calling you Dennis. And I hope everybody is able to hear me.
Very clearly, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and I really appreciate. I was really trying to make sure that I don't show my face. We have been told that we live in the bush, and having not shaved for the last 3.5 months, it is beginning to show. But I hope you guys will not. I have made sure that the lights in the backgrounds hide a lot of things. But I think it's extremely very timely that we are having this kind of discussion. And what I will do in the few minutes I have is I will let the others provide a little bit of the context. And what I will do is to just provide an overview of how things have panned out over the last 3 or so months. And I'm going to combine it with what I see as the recommendations of what we need to do at the civil society on the African continent. The first thing that I want to mention is we had been told that our position in regard to financing was very difficult. We have been told that in terms of our domestic resource mobilization, we are no more than 10% compared to the rest of the other continents, which are much higher. The African debt was standing at $583 billion. That's a huge amount. And so if you look at all the statistics, the impression that we were given was that we would be very bad. And you remember in April, everybody was waiting for Africa to collapse. I mean, they were looking at this continent and say, if Italy cannot survive, if Europe cannot survive, if the United States cannot survive, poor Africans, they have never survived before. Let's see what has happened. But in a few interesting things have emerged for me as critical lessons. So now we need to even pursue this entire discussion on how we finance. The first one is, it's occurred to us that the greatest asset that this continent has is actually our citizens. for a very long time, when we talk about financing, we talk about money, we talk about how much money needs to come from donors, how much money needs to come from our natural resources, we talk about how much money needs to come from our minerals, we talk about whatever the value addition. But if you see the level of innovation, creativity that has been demonstrated by the citizens over the last 90 days, you will agree with me that the greatest resource that this continent has is actually its own people. The amount of innovation, the amount of creativity, the amount of new things that are being churned out. We had a discussion with the leadership of Rwanda some 2 weeks ago. We saw what was happening even in Ethiopia. We have seen what is coming out of Nigeria. We have seen what is coming out of Kenya. And so for me, if there is anything that we should never ever do as civil society, is to continue to underestimate the capacity of our citizens and to always think that the citizens of Africa will never survive if donors do not give us money. We have seen it. We may not make much out of our gold, we may not make much out of our oil, but we have seen how much we can make out of our citizens. The second thing that we have noticed is, quite honestly, our biggest challenge is our government and our leadership. If you notice what happened over the last 2 months, our governments very quickly went into a borrowing fight. Rather than trying to see how we could take advantage of the resources that we have, rather than trying to see how we could do a bit of the manufacturing on our own, we started looking for loans. We started looking for money, and in fact, the Africa Union formed a special team with the three leaders, and at the very first meeting, the first thing that they did was to spread a begging ball, telling Europe how much money they needed. And I remember listening to one of the ministers from Sweden speak, and I was telling myself, hold on a minute, this is not the time for us to be told how much money we need. This is the time for us to be told what we can produce out of the resources that we have. And just to let you know what has happened, Nigeria, for example, was making a request of what? Nigeria was making a request of $6.9 billion without even trying to explain what it had done with the money that it was having. Kenya itself almost made a request of $1 billion. And the amount of money that our leaders have gone to demand, it is almost as if for them, this is something to take advantage of, instead of finding out what can we do within the resources or whatever that we have. So one of the recommendations that comes out of here is that as civil society, we don't have a choice. We must get our leadership right, and we must get our leadership in check. They look like any opportunity they have, what they will do is to sink the continent deeper. We have got a few exceptions. Namibia has done very well. South Africa has done very well. Rwanda has done very well. Mauritius has done very well. But those are 4 countries out of 55. What are the other 55 countries doing? The third thing that we have noticed, if many of you probably haven't, but if you notice it right from the 27th of May, when the European Union decided to give them to give a bailout to Europe, led by France and Germany. Initially, they announced 500 billion euros, but within a very short time, they increased it to 1 trillion euros. The United States announced a 2 trillion euro package. When we did an investigation and we found out, hold on a minute, where is this money coming from? Do you know what we find out? These guys are simply printing money. So because they control the currency, because they're the ones who are in charge of how the monetary systems work, these countries can afford to print money, but the African continent cannot. The global South cannot. We have got absolutely no power whatsoever. Every currency printed within the global South must be backed by either the euro, it must be backed by either the dollar. And so that means that without any commodities, we are typically stuck. We must trade something for us to get money. While for Europe and for the US, when there is a crisis, it is very easy for them to just go back and print money. And who pays the price? Eventually, when it is the same continent, because unfortunately the rules demand that our currency must still be backed by these foreign currencies. So one of the lessons one of the things that we've been trying to push for is, what is it that is holding Africa from having its own currency? Why is it that Africa, with so much in terms of resources, as we speak right now, 67% of the entire resources, natural resources, African, used around the world, resides on the African continent. 33% of the entire freshwater lake, in the entire world remains on this continent. Yet this continent still has got a GDP of just about $2.7 trillion, which is almost 0.1% of the global GDP. What is it that is not making us say, we cannot go on like this? We are going to use the resources of the African continent for us to come together and develop, whether it is a common currency, whether it is whatever, that, so that we are not constantly beholden to the system that is that is created by the IMF. And let me just give you a very interesting story that that happened, and I'll give you the case study.
Summarize, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly. When Kenya attempted to develop a package that was intended to help the businesses and the citizens, the World Bank and the IMF immediately came up front and said no. But yet the same system was actually approved by Europe and by the United States. And so part of what we need to begin asking ourselves, how do we deal with the double standard, where typically we do not have power, but then power resides with them. What we have noticed in conclusion is that what the COVID-19 is going to do to the African continent is not just eroding our own economic power, but it is going to, one, sink us more in debt. Number two, it is going to leave us with a lot of commodities that will now forced to now sell in its raw form. But number three, it is going to now leave us in a state where, while we are talking about Europe giving us a moratorium on debt, what the moratorium has done is to in fact put us in more debt. The G20, for example, decided to give an allowance of a moratorium to 73 countries. Hello?
Sorry, unfortunately, Paul, we lost you there for a second. But if you could finalize,
yes.
so we
I
get
was
to
just
hear
on my
from,
I was just on my last statement.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the last statement is the reason why the G20 could only give a moratorium on 73 countries in the global south is that as we speak right now, the bulk of the financing on Africa is actually in terms of Eurobonds. Now, Eurobonds, unfortunately, are lumped together in a way that it is not possible for you to get a moratorium on on any form of debt without it affecting the Eurobond. And so what it means for the African continent and for the much of the global south is that what COVID has done, it has given an opportunity for the IMF and for Europe to sink Africa much further in debt, meaning that we are probably gone several steps behind on achieving our own SDG targets. Whether we'll be able to get out of it depends a lot on how this discussion goes. We can either begin to whine and say that we need Europe to give us more money, or we can decide to sit and say, as a continent, we are going to stand And we are going to make sure that we take advantage of the citizenry power we have, take advantage of the resources we have, take advantage of the rules that whatever that we have, and begin as civil society to change the game, taking the leadership from our own African leaders. That's what I can say for now.
Thank you so much, Paul. And I'll move straight to Babatunde. From what you've heard from Paul, are we thinking further down when it comes to debt and, of course, all these other indicators?
I mean, I think Paul has provided a very, very political and technical background into the conversations. And this is where civil society now needs to, again, build its own capacity for it to understand what the politics are and also what the technicalities are. Especially when you look at the fact that government revenue is driven by taxes, is driven by trade, and it's also driven by grants, loans, and that comes from developed economies. And when you look at all of this, pre-COVID, we have a trade system that is not balanced. We do also have, a tourist system that we've not grown in across Africa. We have remittances coming into Africa, but then we've not also been able to incentivize that very well. Many of our economies depend so much on, commodities whose prices now have plunged just because we have COVID-19. But pre-COVID-19, the situation isn't better. So we're going to go back to any normal. The normal we want to go back to is a normal where, like Paul said, we can begin to look at citizens' resources. We can also begin to look at innovation and also look at how best can we curb some of the practices that has brought us here. One is the need for us to look at illicit financial flows, curb that and also avoid that as a country. Also now be using our budgets. Our budgets now must be able to develop in such a way that it addresses developmental plans. Across Africa, we're looking at having a situation where budgets that are coming from national and state governments are SDGs based. We aren't seeing much of that happening as at yet, even when you find governments mentioning the SDGs as part of their comments and also their narratives. Also part of that is the need for us to now start getting into conversations around progressive taxing. We can't shy away from, yes, we've said government should attain the SDGs. We must get into the conversations around funding, but in getting into conversations around funding, we must now talk about how government needs to tax fairly and ensure that taxes are progressively done. Again, we've had issues around public-private partnership. The public is always there. Most times it sounds like government. And we've seen the need for private investment. We need to now also quantify civil society investment in funding development. We bring volunteer energy. We bring donor resources in terms of dollar capital into the country. We need to start quantifying that and begin to account for that also as part of development financing. Because in the end, that money is not accounted for. To follow into development and also the energies we bring into that. Having said that, we now also need to start looking at issues around capital markets. Again, I'm beginning to say to myself, what alternative sources of funding do we have? There's a lot of money in our capital markets. Paul has started by giving us what it means to print money and how you need to back that up with dollar or pounds or some commodities. We need to get into those conversations and those understanding as civil society, and also begin to look at the people element of those kind of debates. Most times we've dealt with education as civil society, we've dealt with agriculture, we've dealt with the easy conversations to my mind. But get into the economic conversations, that's where we need to start playing better, because now African governments are asking for debt moratorium. And like Paul said, the conditions that we're having from G20 or from other countries is not even helping African countries to be able, it's better they do not go for that debt moratorium than going for it, because in the end, the conditionalities are not even as good as the state we were pre-COVID. So we need to also get into that debate and begin to campaign, talking to G20 and other governments as to why there has to be either a debt forgiveness, debt moratorium, or a debt relief, as it were, because many of our countries are indebted, these countries already. Plus also now looking at the loans that governments are taking. While we've established that the way for government to get revenue is through loans, through grants, the just get or they will get it. And a couple of programs, but also help us to build back better. Social protection systems have to now be funded 110% because that's the best way to get many out of poverty now, because many have lost jobs and they've lost their source of income. We're also saying that we need to invest now in internet connectivity, affordability, and meaningful connection. But for the internet, we wouldn't have been able to do this. But not everyone would have access to the internet, and even if there's the internet connection, they can't afford the mobile devices for them to be able to connect to the internet. And when the connections are there, you see that the connections are not even 110% strong, which should be strong. So these are areas we need to now focus as civil society and say, yes, we know you can obtain loans, but these loans, what are you using them for? How will this loan help us to grow our economy and attain the SDGs? We also need to get into conversations around balance of trade, because we must sell our commodities, and when we sell our commodities, we must use that money to develop our systems, our countries. So asset recovery is also part of it. All the monies that has been looted across Africa, we need to get into that conversation and get those assets back for the people so that we can begin to use those assets, for us to be able to develop. There's also the need for us to have something like a global stimulus package. The rich at this time must now find a way of helping the poor. And in helping the poor, you must ensure that the conditions that you are bringing to the table help the poor to grow, not to kill the poor or for you to feed fat on the poor. Spending must now also be transparent. Before now, spending hasn't been transparent, but now it must now be transparent. Another area where I think we should focus on is how our tax reliefs are being given to corporations, that we give to larger corporations that are coming into the country or that are already in the country. Government must tell us how this is being managed, because these are foregone revenues that could have helped the country to also develop. So in my mind and my thinking, while it's good for us to advocate for the attainment of the SDGs, I do think that now is the time for us to get into the politics and the technicalities of funding. What does it mean to do quantitative easing? What does it mean for us to get information on how taxes are being used and how tax reliefs are given to bigger corporations? What does it mean for us to recover assets that are stolen in developed economies that needs to come back to our country? These are conversations we need to get into our civil society. Davis, I hand over back to
you. Thank you so much, Babatunde, for those reflections. I'm sure there will be some questions coming up, and if you look at the chat, of course, Pauline from Kenya is saying it's very scary to hear that COVID-19 will make us sink more in debt. And the question is, how far can we sink, and how deep is the debt pit? And like Paul said, we have to focus and take advantage of the resources that we have. And Babatunde, you've offered some really great potential domestic solutions for financing for development. Please keep your questions, and of course, if we'll keep looking at the chat and reflecting on those. Paul, that question on how deep can we sink? I'll come back to you on that. But before that, let's hear the Latin American perspective on financing for development. And Patricia, if you could offer some insights on that, that would be really fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I'm gonna somehow I'm gonna fail to give you I am not a finance, I'm an economist, I am a feminist, so I'm going to give you, you know, a perspective from civil society organization and the urgency for to finance SEO to try to implement the SDGs. In Latin America, as you may know, we have a problem of a huge inequality. We are the region that face the most, the biggest and the deepest inequality in the world. Brazil is not, does not have a problem with external debts, but has a big problem of internal debts and our sustainable development and the changes that are proposed by this agenda, I think that it's imperative to recognize the role of civil society organizations and how they can meet the goals and targets, and also monitoring the implementation of the SDG agenda. That's what we are looking for, and especially looking at the women's organization and the feminist movements. So what we are proposing, and as I say, I'm gonna be very propositive from the ground. What we are proposing as civil society organizations from the regions, we are proposing a very strong South-South cooperation, and I'm very glad to be here with our sisters and brothers from Africa. We have to engage in peer learning, exchanging process to strengthen our perspective, our feminist and women's movements, exchanging and bringing gender and climate justice as a priority. That for us is a very important issue in this conversation, South-South cooperation. We need space, as we are having, and I claim this space to be here, and support to amplify our voices, because we know that we have the solution, and as Paul said and the previous speaker said, our voices, our analysis as well, and our struggles as feminists, as civil society organizations, working on the ground. We have to really find space and find innovative solutions to cope with our struggles and our problems. And I have a lot of data. If I have time, I'm gonna go and talk about the data that we have, the numbers, the figures of the inequality of Brazil and Latin America as a region. We also we are proposing to build an agenda in which we can propose effective change based on our ground realities and practices. And these practice and these analysis are based on the data that we have been collecting. We have to recognize that, CSO are implementing the SDG agenda and working on the SDG agenda from bottom up and collecting data and analyzing data. And this can be used for effective change in all the three levels: local, national, and global level. So, and why this is so important for us, as a proposition for a South-South cooperation. The first thing is that the COVID pandemic has exposed the complete failure of our governments to, and not just in Brazil, in Latin America, governments as well, to reduce the enormous inequality, being gender, race, and we are going to talk a lot about racism in Brazil and in Latin America, not just in United States, but also the class inequality. And what represents a big failure in the implementation of the SDG agenda as well? Because all citizens are entitled, and that's something that our minister from our Supreme Court just said, all citizens are entitled to a good governance. And that calls on the responsibility of our governments at all levels to deliver policies that can respond to our needs, and that implies opening a space for our participation in monitoring the implementation of such policies. And once again, the SDG agenda offers a good framework for that. And that's what we are doing, in fact. Therefore, we call on all the international community, multilateral agencies, and donors community, donors major group, to listen and to invest in our organizations on the ground, and especially in women's organizations and in the feminist movements. We need to recognize the work, what worked really effectively, and that are many organizations operating in very different level that have used the agenda in a very creative and very innovative manner, and with concrete results that need to be upscaled. We also call on the need to explore how CSO apply this agenda in very different contexts, bringing practice that need to be exchanged and disseminated. The lessons that we learned from this crisis, and now I'm going to give you some idea of the magnitude of inequality in our region. The pandemic.
I'll need you to summarize, Patricia, because of time. But yes,
yeah,
if you could make
already?
a few closing remarks. Yeah.
Okay. So the lessons from the crisis is that the pandemic is exposing all the old and persistent problems that our society face, and that has been ignored and for centuries. And we are talking about the myth of racial democracy. Sorry?
Apologies. Someone is speaking. Please mute if you're not speaking. Go ahead, Patricia.
Yes, and I think that we have to see the problems that we have faced in terms of inequality, informality, the reforms that we have, seen. We are talking about the deaths. Our problem is the reforms. We are talking about the labor reform, fiscal reform, and also social security reforms that were imposed as a, as a necessary remedy for our countries, and how this now is being exposing the problems that we are facing. But I would like to concentrate now, since I have just few moments, that we have been building solutions. We have been collecting data, not just to inform the national government or the international community, but to effective change policies at local level, where people have access to their governments and they can provide effective change. We need to scale up. We need to support these movements. We need to support our, how can I say, South-South collaboration, cooperation. And also we need to inform the international community about the analysis, about the, how can I say, the praxis that we have, and fund these kind of initiatives to reduce the enormous inequality that we are facing in this region, and also to understand that this big investment, as we know, our government's policies are not even considering the SDG agenda. In Brazil, the SDG agenda is not in the national government policies. It's completely ignored. What they are doing is ignoring the pandemic, and they are killing the people, We have to think that all the lives matter, And we have the duty, not just with Brazil and the Brazilians and the indigenous population, the quilombolas, but all lives. And we know that we can bring the solution. Just listen to us, just consider what CSOs are doing, and we are organized, very well organized. We can organize from community to global levels. We establish big movements, social movement, feminist social movement, platforms, and we have a contribution. So I don't think that we have to wait for the governments to provide the solution. We have to bring the solution. We have to do this by establishing these corporations, by looking at what concrete change and very innovative ways of working with SDGs agenda. And also providing a very good analysis on the gender discrimination, race discrimination, and class discrimination.
1 minute.
And how they are interlinked. We have, as I said, we have collected a lot of information, a lot of data. Just to give you one example.
Thank you, Patricia.
Yeah.
Given the time constraints, unfortunately, I'll have to cut you short, but I'm sure there will be an opportunity when the questions start coming through for you to possibly share 1 or 2 examples of that, because we do need to get into another session. But that was a very rich perspective from Latin America, especially looking at the strength of social movements and of course the role that civil society can actually play, given that they're already organized, and what they need is basically just frameworks that can fully explore their potential. We really appreciate that. And unfortunately, for this particular panel, there will be a brief session towards the end for questions and answers. So I would want you to keep those. But we'd also like to hear from a few experts the impact of COVID-19, especially on the global South, when it comes to the SDGs implementation, local innovation, and technology, and what and to discuss Dr. Olwach, Kenya SDGs Forum. We'll also have Elizabeth Gulugulu, who's an environmentalist from Zimbabwe. We also have Loretta Akpeme, Ahokpeme, I hope I'm pronouncing your name well, who's the National Coordinator, CAS 2030 Nigeria. From Asia, we'll also hear from Asha Chandra, who's the President, All India Women's Education Fund Association. I'll dive straight into Ross. If you could spend maybe 5 to 7 minutes just quickly reflecting on the impact of COVID-19 and give very specific examples of what we are seeing happening, that would be really great. And this time I'll be monitoring the time, so I'll warn you when you have 1 minute.
Okay, thank you. I think, I hope I've unmuted myself. Yes, I've unmuted myself. Okay, thank you. Davis, before even discussing the impact, I think I want to just go back briefly to the start of the year, because last year during the HLPF, we were re-energized because it's when the Decade of Action was launched. And when we started this year, we were very, very energized, as well as focusing on what does it mean, what does the Decade of Action mean, and for us at Kenya, what is it that we wanted to do. So we started off the year by going out there and speaking not only to the youth, but also to understand, to the community, and came up with a video that we were actually working on the faces of poverty, whereby we're looking at what do we mean within even this Decade of Action by leaving anyone behind, and how does what are the faces of poverty in Kenya and how do they look like? At the same time, in conversations with the youth, we were able to get from them what are the needs of the youth, beyond even just discussions on youth unemployment, of course, which is very high in Kenya, but what are the other needs and how can we, what are the recommendations they are making moving forward within this decade of action? So in that process of having those conversations and launching the decade of action, then COVID happened. And that threw us into, you know, into a totally different direction. Now, in March, when we started doing the lockdowns even in Kenya, the first thing that we did as a forum, SDG Kenya Forum, was to have conversations and send out a questionnaire to really begin understanding how are the civil society organizations coping with this, both financially as well as the lockdown. One of the things that we found out, which was affecting everyone, including us, is that first of all, the donors, most of them were not even willing to purpose or to set aside money for this new emergency. And therefore, it became a challenge because the funding that most organizations had were activity specifics, which were actually focused on the activities which were going to be happening during the year. And then now when COVID happened, we had to begin thinking, where is the money coming from? And a lot of organizations have had to deal with, to struggle with that. Now, also, one of the things that we found out when we did that study was the process of even looking for new funding was not only tedious and also frustrating in the middle of this new, new pandemic that we are dealing with. So I think in terms of how has this impacted the civil societies, financially, it's been a big hit for the civil societies. And obviously, if the civil society is hit financially, it means even our communities are suffering. Now, going into your question in terms of, what not only the impact, but what do we see as new, and what we can say what is happening in Kenya in terms of the changes. One of the things that, as much as we look at issues to do with Goal 5 on GBV, we are saying that it is bringing, the pandemic is actually bringing the invisible to become visible. For instance, now there is a lot of discussion globally and also in Kenya on issues to do with gender-based violence, of course, the issues of teen pregnancies which are happening, but also the digital divide, because we are finding that children are really affected and impacted, especially those who are not even able to access internet. So there are many, many issues that were not visible before, which are now, because of this pandemic, they are being made visible. So to a certain extent, we can look at the pandemic as definitely having a huge impact on SDGs, because we are even going to have trade-offs when it comes to implementation of the 17 goals. The focus now is going obviously to health. Most of the resources that were there are actually now going to health. Then what does that mean to all the other SDGs? More specifically, even when you look at those basic SDGs of water and sanitation, education, gender, even going all the way to climate change, where are we going to get the money when most of the finances is now going into health? Do I still have time that I can continue, Davis? I was looking at the time and I was like,
no, I think, yeah, if you could pause there so we get to hear from Loretta. I'm sure there will be, thank you so much for those reflections, really wonderful. And of course, we'll consolidate everything that the other panelists share and respond to a few questions that have been raised in the chat. So over to you, Loretta, if you could also offer some perspectives from Nigeria. Do we have Loretta with us? If not, I'll go to Asha. Asha, maybe let's start with you, and then once we get Loretta, we can go back. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Davis. And thank you to everybody who's organized this panel, the SDGs Kenya Forum, Civil Society, Advanced Forum of Sustainable Development Nigeria, and Civil Society Platform Ghana. Thank you so much for having us here. And thank you for all the information sharing that we've had from Global South capture right from SDG financing. In fact, everybody has talked about it, to integrating voice mechanisms to accelerate the implementation of the SDGs. My organization, the All India Women's Education Fund Association, was actually founded in 1929, 91 years ago, under the inspiration of Mahatma Gandhi. And the organization went on to establish Asia's first home science college, called the Lady Irwin College, which provides education with a scientific temper. So in our projects, we are combining academic strength with sound implementation strategies, and our grassroots programs are localized, holistic, and sustainable. From the beginning, we unbundled the sustainable development, matched them to daily rural lives and amenities, gathered best practices from Africa and Asia, and presented them at the United Nations through a World We Women Want, case studies from Asia and Africa, and women's economic empowerment from India, and Khadi Goes Global. These are some of the brochures, books we have come out with, and they are all available on our website. During this time of limited or focused financing, which I think everyone is talking about, civil society could break free from SDG silos and assess the multiplier effect. For example, funding for a poverty alleviation program is bound to have a spillover effect on SDGs related to health and nutrition, education, women's empowerment, and so on. This will impact SDG acceleration at the grassroots itself. This is something we have done and which has been successful, because donors give you money for or sponsorship for a certain SDG. But at our level, at the grassroots level, we can combine all these things, because anyway, they are part of unbundled SDGs. One key outcome of our Global South collaboration has been the common nature of problems faced by women from Latin America, Africa, Asia, and the link between women's empowerment and the implementation of the SDGs. This is very important. Women, the SDGs are incomplete, and we can never reach the decade 2030 of development. Before COVID, on the 30th of December 2019, the Sustainable Development Goals Index of India was released. It comprehensively documents the progress made by the Indian states and union territories towards achieving the 2030 SDG targets. On this occasion, the UN coordinator, Renata Dessalines, said, in 2020, the world enters a final decade for achieving the SDGs, the decade for action. India's composite score has improved from 57 in 2018 to 60 in 2019, thereby showing noticeable progress. Patricia had also spoken about the decade for action, that this is the decade we need to do whatever has to be done to achieve the Agenda 2030. But since December 2019, the COVID-19 has plundered and ravaged 216 countries or territories or areas, forcing us all to press the reset button. This new vision with fresh perspectives and innovative revivals needs to be focused on for the common good and to leave no one behind. In this, I think we all have this common agenda from Latin America, Africa, and Asia, that we have limited finances. how to use them best, and to leave no one behind, but for the common good and with ethics. That is the most important thing. In a country of 1.3 billion people, the raging pandemic has spared neither the rich nor the disadvantaged. Lockdowns have brought school closures, crashing economies, loss of livelihoods, disruption in food and essential supplies, massive movement of 20 million migrant laborers from cities to their home states, exposing a weak health infrastructure that would surely collapse under the weight of the COVID-19 infections. Fear of the unknown and lack of protective gear triggered rising inequalities. Since 12th March, when WHO characterized COVID-19 as a pandemic, policymakers, businesses, civil society, and the general public have stepped up and provided best practices in the social, economic, and environmental parameters. Of course, everybody knows of the climate, the impact, which has been good. CO2 levels have come down. We see clearer blue skies, more water bodies, more water, etc. But then again, this is all short-lived. So some examples of best practices that have been followed have been that dry and cooked food has been distributed at all levels by communities, individuals, and there's a shining example of a Michelin star chef who distributed 9 million meals to the vulnerable. So such stories dominate our pages, newspapers, the internet, media, etc. One inspiring story is about making a buck and waging a war. Women's self-help groups manufactured 300,000 liters of hand sanitizer, 3.9 million masks, 200,000 personal protection kits consisting of a mask, eye shield, shoe cover, gown, and gloves, which doctors and healthcare workers wear during the treatment of COVID-19. Before COVID, the masks were, at a very negligible level. There were no PPE kits. There was nothing. There were no ventilators. And since then, private sector and everybody stepped up, and there was this huge cry for vocal for local. Get things made in India for the Indians and export them also. At the government level, India dispatched supplies of the anti-malarial drug hydroxychloroquine to 55 coronavirus hit countries as grants as well as on a commercial basis. US dollars 266 billion, almost 10% of India's GDP, was allocated for COVID relief, which was in the base it included, in addition to a heavily subsidized supply of rice and wheat, a special scheme for free supply of 5 kilograms per person of wheat or rice, whatever was their staple diet, and a kilogram of lentil. This covered 800 million people, and this will be distributed till November when we have when our festive seasons end. So the underprivileged will be able to have their festive season with grain in their homes. Cash transfers to poor widows, aged, disabled, and farmers have been made. Self-help groups have been, the collateral-free loans that they were getting, the limit has been raised. In the overstretched medium and small enterprises sector, the government has agreed to pay the Employee Provident Fund from both the employers and the employees on both their behalves for the next 3 months. For construction workers, mainly migrants, states have been directed to utilize USD 4 billion welfare fund for building and construction workers for the benefit of 35 million workers. Most of these workers have been the migrant workers. Amidst the rising coronavirus numbers and tragic deaths, green shoots are now beginning to emerge. On the back of
2 minutes to sum up, please.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'll just do that, Davis. On the back of a good monsoon, the agricultural sector has shown 50% high crop sowing, and fertilizer consumption has gone up by 100%. Migrant laborers, which were 40 million in June, they had applied for the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. That again is under great strain because this is on road building, etc. And the government can ill afford to have the migrants in their villages when work in the cities, people are willing to give them more funds for that. So in fact, this is a story again. Employers are sending planes, trains, and buses to the homes of the migrant labor and ensuring that they get higher wages and calling them back to the cities. But in this, we have to be very vigilant that the labor reforms are carried out with the human rights face. The economy, again, is on the upsurge because both supply and demand shocks, because the wholesale price index is declining sharply. Now, to build back better, people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership assume an even greater importance. We need to incorporate social justice and re-examine lessons to inculcate the capacity to build skills, lifelong learning, and bridge with hope the gap between schools and the world children would like to see. Skills including telework need to be filled in. Corporates are loosening the purse strings for COVID-19, but NGOs working on other causes are strapped for cash. If funding drops, we will be looking at job losses in this sector also. In the absence of medical interventions, medical intervention funds, elders, people with disabilities and others could see lives lost due to diseases and COVID. Human beings are resilient, and we together can build a better world for our people.
Thank you, Asha. Thank you so much. For those reflections from Asia, in the interest of time, I'll just quickly go to Elizabeth, who's going to give us some reflections from Zimbabwe, and apologies for skipping you on the list.
No, thank you so much. And thank you for the platform. As you have read, I'm Elizabeth Kulugulu from Zimbabwe, and I'll be giving a brief on how we have been affected by the global pandemic, COVID-19, not only in Zimbabwe, but as Southern Africa. I think, as you all know, that Southern Africa, just like any other regions, it has been affected, just like any other countries, it has been affected. And the decade of action, the year of ambition, does not have to stop because we've been affected by a global crisis, which is COVID-19. Indeed, we are living in unprecedented times, but this calls for high innovation, it calls for strategies, it calls for active use in terms of technology. And we have been affected as a region in terms of food systems when it comes to food transportation, food production. We have severely been very, very affected, but this has brought new innovative ideas from young people within the region who have managed to come up with great applications that are being used. For example, here in Zimbabwe, we have what you call Fresh in a Box, where you can use an application, order what you want, and they'll bring the food at your doorstep without necessarily going to the shops. So this is the world we are now living in. Technology is not the future, technology is now the present. And each and every person should begin to learn the basics of technology, because we are talking about online shopping, we are talking about online transactions, e-learning, a lot of things that technology is now being used. But also, as we're concentrating on technology, we have also realized a huge gap, a major gap that is there, because we are definitely leaving some other people behind. The rural communities that do not have these resources that we are talking about, they do not have access to the internet, we are leaving them behind. Yet the global goals, they talk and they emphasize about leaving no one behind. So this is what we need to look into as NGOs, as young people, as citizens from different parts of the country. We have been affected in terms of education, in terms of health, in terms of our environment, food, children, even business themselves, they've been affected. And we have realized that we are actually capacitated. We just realized that we can actually manufacture ventilators, which we didn't know that we can actually manufacture. And I think last month, South African government managed to manufacture 10,000 ventilators using locally manufactured materials. Yet we didn't know that we can do that. We're relying more on imports. But then the lockdown, when the borders were closed, we couldn't import a lot of things, which means that we need to go back to the drawing board because there is a huge demand of local products. And this shows that there is need for alternative solutions and production. And we really need to reevaluate on how best we can boost our economies, how best we can boost our Africa with the use of our local indigenous resources. And we've been importing small things like gloves, small things like face masks. And we've learned that these are some of the things that we can actually manufacture. And of course, we need much support when it comes to investment in vaccines, which is quite important, and also research itself. Within the region, we've had Namibia and South Africa that have been leading in terms of COVID-19 researches. And we also have UN agencies like the UNDP who have been assisting young people, even other people who have innovative ideas. They've been boosting them, giving them resources and funds in order for them to fill in the gap that is there. And when it comes to environment, we realize that you can rely more on different applications like the geographical information systems, our remote sensing to monitor our carbon emissions, to monitor how our environment is being protected and being preserved. And like I said, technology is no longer the future. Technology is the present. It's now the present, and we now need to grasp and learn the simple basics of technology. We also need to make sure that we are leaving no one behind as we are doing so. We also need to make sure that we are using an inclusive approach. And this global pandemic has shown us that because we have failed to manage SDG number 3, it simply means that we cannot achieve all the goals, because even goal 1, goal 2, they've all been affected. Energy, it has been affected. Hunger, poverty, it has been affected. So there's a greater need and greater need for us to come together. Goal 17, partnership of the goals. We need to work together as African countries, learn to rely on ourselves, learn to know that some of the things we can manufacture, we do not necessarily have to get into debts because we have been affected by a pandemic. Some of the things we can adapt and we can come up with solutions. I hope I've managed to stick to time, and thank you so much.
That was great. Thank you so much for sticking to time. I think the theme that's really emerging here is, citizens can do it. And Paul Okomo pretty much set that as the scene for this particular webinar. So I'm really glad that theme is actually reverberating across all speakers, that it is possible for countries to do it. And we have seen and have been forced in some instances to actually figure out how we can innovate and, of course, use the resources that we have in our respective countries. Loretta, I don't know if you are with us. Maybe you could make a very quick intervention.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh,
Yeah,
fantastic, Loretta. Yeah, go ahead.
Good afternoon or good evening or good morning to everybody. Actually, localizing SDG in Nigeria has not been very easy because funding has not been there. But then, the CSO CAS 2030 has been on ground, moving around all the communities, localizing this SDG, because first of all, we need to let our people understand what SDG is all about. And some of the documents have been transmitted into local dialects and languages, and more people are beginning to understand what SDG is about. And for the innovation, concerning the COVID-19, initially it wasn't easy because the government did not employ the use of the CSO component. But then we didn't wait. We had to move into the field ourselves and do as much as possible what we could to enlighten the people and engage them to understand where COVID is real. By the time government was ready and it started trickling down, of course, some fake news had already started flying. So the innovation there is that a lot of people also had to, start using social media. But of course, the reporter of the people do not have Android phones that cannot access the internet. And so they had to go into the community, despite the fact that the the lockdown was there, some had to apply to government for pass, and they were able to move it to the communities, and they were able to, sensitize some people from, households. And a lot of them also didn't want to listen because they felt that if they opened their doors, they could be infected. And when it comes to also that innovation, a lot of tailors, people that sew, instead of waiting for face masks and all that, started on their own, to sew face masks and sell. And by that way, and even people were also producing hand sanitizers. A lot of private people went into hand sanitizing making, and a lot of people also were empowered, to look for ways to make sure that their income do not, come to zero. And they started making soups also. And some also Nigerians also came up with some local herbs that they felt that could, help stop the rampage of COVID-19 in Nigeria. But of course, in our usual way, government will not also listen to them. They will always prefer going outside and, buying whatever the North is giving to us, whatever the global North is offering us, without looking inwards to know if we actually have solutions. Because I'm sure Nigerians, Africans have solutions to all these things. These are issues, that our local herbs can actually help us take care of. And then for the technology, of course, so many Africans are already into technology, and they know how to, use technology to produce a lot of things. For me personally, I have learned so much, this lockdown. I was able to learn how to make flyers, with my mobile phone. I was able to learn how to edit videos and all that. And a lot of people are doing that and learning, online skills for those that can actually do that. And we are also saying that since technology has become this our new world, we need to make sure ensure that our government take it serious to make internet access to everybody. And also for telephone manufacturers to produce little phones, that could access internet, so that people do not need to, go buying expensive phones and big phones for them to be able to access internet and be able to get information. These are things that we need to do, because it's important that we get our people to know what it is all about. Because even from what the Francis Guru, Director General of World Intellectual Property said, he said, if we do things in exactly the same way, we are not going to be able to develop an adequate response to the many challenges that are being thrown up to the economy and to the society by them. So innovation is going to be important and fundamental. That is why we need to go back home, sit back in all our platforms, in different platforms we belong to, and think of a way to come out of this pandemic, to think of a way to come out of this crisis, to ensure that we, on our own, have new ideas of doing things, so that at the end of the day, we are not left out. Okay, look at education in Africa. Like in Nigeria now, 3/4 of the children are at home. They are not doing anything. They are just at home, whiling away time. And some of them are getting into crime. Some are getting into cultism. A lot of things are happening. Children are being raped every day. And if our government were able to come up with innovation on how to run education, even while the children are at home, I'm sure they would have been engaged, and these ills would have been curtailed and boycotted. But because we keep thinking of what the North is doing, and sometimes we do not have the wherewithal, or do I say it is the corruption in us that is also limiting what we can do. So I believe that if we actually want to make localized SDG, then nobody should be left out. And if nobody is going to be left out, all of us must remember that it is our responsibility, coupled with government also, making it possible for people at the grassroots by applying a bottom-top approach, making sure that they have the pulse of the people at the grassroots, so that when they are formulating policies and taking up implementation of programs and projects, they will have the mind that this is what the people need, and not just at the national level, creating issues and policies that are not going to be, localized at the community, and the community will not even know about it. A lot of laws and policies are there, that nobody is implementing simply because the local people do not know what it is. They do not understand. So generally, the grassroots people are afraid of government and their laws and their policies because of the misunderstanding that is always has been there. So that lack of trust is also part of what we need to look into and make sure that the people whom you are governing, I'm referring now to the government, whom you are governing, can understand your policies and be able to implement them as at when they need them.
Thank you.
And then the CSOs, especially the CAST 2030, will continue to take this message, this key message, down to the grassroots where they need it, interpret these laws and these policies so that the local people can understand it and embrace it, because it is for our good. So if we must make sure that everybody is on the same platform, these messages must get to the grassroots. I don't like this idea of every policy at remaining at the national, just top up there. And people at the grassroots do not understand what the government is doing. Neither do they understand what is happening in our country or in Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Loretta, for those great perspectives. And I'll give Patricia just 1 minute to answer the question on data collection, because that came up earlier and people were curious about how you're collecting data and how you're using it. And immediately after that, I'll hand over to Florence, who's going to run the next session. Thank you.
It is very important. Thank you very much. Very quickly. How we are collecting data? We are collecting data using the national statistic data, like we are doing comparing demographic data, demographic census, but we are also collecting data on the very primary data using the women as the primary collector, as surveyors. So with this, and I disagree with some speakers, we cannot wait for government to do anything. We have to be armed with evidence and show the evidence to the government and say, look how the policies are bad, how the policies are impacting women. And we are doing this by collecting the data and using the data for advocacy at 2 levels, local level, and we have splendid cases in which, for instance, 75,000 people will be receiving land titles based on these surveys and this data collection. Also, there is a very short, another case in which we are comparing data, agriculture data 2016, 6 and 17, and collecting primary data to show how a big investment is affecting women's lives. So we are using this data collection to also do an analysis, putting gender and women's lens to showcase and to change the policies. And final, I think that's very important to understand that we have to look at the private sector as a source of investment. We just had a very great example. Right now, during our campaign, we have received tons of alcohol and food from the private sector to be distributed to our communities. So I think that we have to be very innovative on the way we look of the financing, not just looking at the international community, also looking at the government. For instance, in this area where we collected data and showed that the public investment was impacting negatively on women's lives, we are sitting with governments and also with the private companies and saying, look, the impact that you produced.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Patricia. I'm going to hand over to Florence, who will quickly run the last segment. Thank you so much to all my panelists. I think the role of data and information cannot be underestimated. Like you're saying, we need the evidence, to have constructive engagement with governments, and I think that's an important point. Florence, if you could come into run the next session that brings together a number of experts to discuss the post-COVID SDGs. What are we seeing in terms of implementation and escalation? And of course, give some insights on how government are actually working with civil society to implement the SDGs in the context of COVID-19. Thank you so much, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Davis, and to all the speakers. It's been a very, very interesting session. Lots has come out, and especially on issues of financing in the Global South, but also issues of innovation in terms of local manufacturing, what has been happening in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's very, very encouraging to know that this particular pandemic has really pushed the Global South to come up with very innovative ways, and also to take, to take charge in some of the things that need to be done at a country level. So just to continue with the conversation, and I know the time is not very much on our side, I'd urge the next three speakers who are going to conclude this conversation to be very spot on and to take very few minutes. So I'll quickly just read out the next speaker, and then we can have a question and answer. In the meantime, I want to encourage all of you to sort of type out any questions. There's a question and answer segment down at the panel. Please type out any questions, so that will give the speakers later on to sort of respond to them. So going to the first speaker, Mr. Atim Aznaga, Sustainable Development Youth from Morocco. It would be very interesting to hear from him coming from North Africa, and also him being a youth representative. Many times we leave out young people in these critical conversations. And so, Mr. Atim, kindly take the floor.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I am sorry because I am not able to activate my camera because I am the way, and also I am engaged with you. But thank you so much. It is an honor and pleasure to me to be with you today in this important side event, Africa in the high-level political forum. It's also a pleasure to share with you my passion for the 2030 agenda and the 17 SDGs that we can do for not only for our global south, but also for our community. I would also to mention something very important for the relation between the government and youth organization or also the organization NGO. Patricia, she mentioned something very important. It's evidence between government and NGO, because the relation or the way how we can have some ways of collaboration between government and NGO, we can do the advocacy. But at the national level, civil society organization play a critical role in translating global agenda into national priorities, working through networks and their members. In turn, they ensure that enough their supporter and citizen that they work with these national priorities reflect prevention, regional and local needs, grounded in people-lived realities. What the important thing in the NGOs can do to implement the sustainable development in the national level? I give just a sample example. As I am president of the Sustainable Development Youth Organization in Morocco, we are working in a national SDG campaign in Morocco. This national campaign, it's like a ways where we meet the government, and not only the government, because we have what named the parliament. It's the legislative process, and very important to approach the parliament in the process of implementing the SDGs, because if we have legislative ways, we can have a local impact of the Agenda 2030. In our campaign, we are working not only with government, we are working with local network youth and also the government. We are able to mobilize parliament, government, youth networks, NGO organization, and that be a key to win the UN Award for Sustainable Development in the world as mobilizer. This is just a sample example. But today we are in new situation, a new life with the pandemic COVID-19, and to work to implement the SDGs, our priorities in the national level changed, because before COVID-19 we are working in some area, or we are working in priorities. But today our first priorities is how we can protect health and vulnerable category in the society, and this is very important to mention. The second point is how can government work in this critical situation, because how we can have the contact between society, between NGO and the government. I give also an example of the Moroccan government, what do in this situation of pandemic. Morocco was one of the most reactive countries in controlling the coronavirus pandemic, also in mitigating its health, social, and economic repercussion. In this regard, a battery of measures have been taken. All this is under the Higher Wild Directive in Morocco to both not only preserve the health of population, but also help vulnerable social categories and mitigate the effects of the pandemic on the economic life of the country. And this is as a sample example of Morocco government what do in this crisis of pandemic. I provide the opportunity to mention solidarity is very important for government and for NGO to work with solidarity mind, to engage all efforts in the national level. Because yes, we have the Agenda 2030, we have the SDGs, but we not have the local action, because we need to take action. I mentioned take action in the local level, and in our Africa, in also the South, global South, we need to take action to be more meaningful in our society. And the very important last thing is how we can have the link between the NGO and the government in this situation of crisis. Because in this situation of crisis, we are in quarantine, we have a lot of things as obstacles of our work. For that, Patricia, she mentioned the evidence, how we can create the evidence behind our work, to have some collaboration of advocacy and also of integration of youth. I mentioned the youth is very important. And finally, we have a challenge. We have a challenge in today in this situation. Challenge of government. How can government work to against COVID and other things? And challenge of citizen. How citizen can attract or the feedback of citizen in this society. And the last one is the challenge of the structure. Our structure before COVID-19 is not our structure right now, because in the economic, in the social, in a lot of areas, we should to think all together and both to be engaged inside. Thank you so much to give me the word today, and very happy to share with you this important information. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Hatim. We can feel the passion in your presentation. Keep up the good work as a young person. Thank you so much. So let me move to the next speaker. I'd like to invite Madam Mrs. Gondu. Sorry, I don't know if I'll be able to pronounce your name correctly. Mrs. Gundo Esinoke from the ED of Community Initiative for Enhanced Peace and Development. So please take the floor. We'll just give you 5 minutes and then we'll have the last speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to articulate my point regarding how government is working with CSOs to implement the SDG in the era of COVID-19 in Nigeria. A lot of people have said a lot of things about this, everyone that have really presented have mentioned one thing or the other, that the CSOs are doing in their capacity during this COVID-19, different countries. And it gladdens my heart because I'm seeing that we are not alone on this in Nigeria. That's actually a generalized thing. People are doing, CSOs are doing it everywhere in the world from what I've heard. But I have put my point into I've actually put my thought into 4 points. One, I will want to look at how to promote, that CSOs are promoting citizen-centric collaborative governance by supporting communities, other citizen groups to adopt a co-production strategy approach for development projects in this COVID-19. And this is not really very new. This is actually what we also have been doing. What do I mean by strategic approach? What do I mean by co-production strategic approach? It's an approach where communities do not rely on government for public services. We see that a lot. I mean, the government is meant to give us light, water, the basic facilities. But you see that sometimes the government, they're not up to it. So in this COVID era, civil society have upped their game in actually facilitating communities, especially hard to reach communities on their own. With the help of CSOs, you've seen in places, communities have built hand washing stations where people can go and wash their hands. You have also seen community mobilize, CSO mobilizing community to produce masks and sanitizer. This actually, I think the lady from the South Africa also mentioned that, happening in South Africa. So we experience a lot of that in Nigeria. Also because CSOs gain deep community trust. Of course, all the CSOs will work in the communities. And during a period of time, we build trust with the communities and all that. So you see that CSOs are collaborating with diaspora communities, philanthropies. Patricia talked about that too, while she was presenting, where the community people are bringing private sector. You actually use private sector, bringing sanitizer and face masks for you people to distribute. So a lot of things are happening. And this actually speaks directly to SDG 17, because it's talking about partnership. So you see community, diaspora community, you see private sectors coming together, working with CSOs to actually reach the hard to reach communities. We also see CSOs are also providing innovative, sustainable solutions. Someone talked about alternative solutions, but I like to say it's an innovative, sustainable solution. This is done by CSOs increasing responsiveness to challenges of COVID-19. There are a lot of challenges of COVID-19, but CSOs has come up to say, what can this be done? So you see a lot of things are happening. They are facilitating on their own to be responsive. They're also facilitating government to also be responsive. So relevant agencies about the difficulties citizens are facing are being taken up by CSOs to present to the government and actually direct their attention towards providing solutions to that. On this, CSOs have done a lot by strengthening collective and inclusive action, ensuring that progress made towards SDG are not lost during this COVID-19. These are done by, it's been presented, it's been talked about by different speakers, on ICT solution, especially e-learning. There have been apps, a lot of apps have been developed by CSOs. There's also, I also think the lady from South Africa also mentioned that where there's micro and mini businesses are being supported by apps that will help them to function online and all that, because that is the way to go. So CSOs have been at the forefront of doing that, helping mini businesses, micro businesses to survive during this pandemic. Not only that, helping them, but also linking them up to the facilities that are available, because there are a lot of facilities available. And like my colleague said from Nigeria, when the pandemic started, the government didn't bother integrating CSOs into the solutions they're bringing in. So CSOs are left on their own, but they took it up themselves and started looking at what are the things available. How can we help our immediate communities, because we work with the communities, we work with the rural communities, we work with hard to reach communities, we work with the vulnerable populations, the poor and the vulnerable. These are our immediate
If you could please wind up. Sorry, Ms. Egondu, we seem to have lost your connection. So, I've lost your connection.
So,
sorry.
While this is going on, government is trying to get their act together. CSOs are responding to poor communities. Someone also talked about have done a lot on monitoring the progress. I think that only what gets measured, just having our,
Okay, could you wind up, please? Hello, I think we lost her. Okay, so.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, and your time is up.
Okay, sorry?
Oh, I'm saying your time is up. Allow me to move to the speaker.
Okay.
Yes. So our next speaker is one of the co-hosts of this particular meeting, George Osei from the CSOs platform in Ghana. And so, George, we're looking forward to hearing from you. Please take the floor. Thank you. George, you're muted. Please unmute.
Sorry, I thought I had unmuted myself. Okay, sorry. So thank you very much. I'll try to be very brief. Basically, COVID threw all of us off guard, and at the initial stages, government basically forgot about existing partnership arrangement, and so basically they were handling things on their own. But we have reached out to government to just seek explanation as to why the various structures that were put in place to fight COVID, excluded civil society. They have explained that, well, they do not want to be seen to be, if you like, getting civil society to be in their pocket so that civil society can play their independent role. With that explanation, what we then did was that as civil society, COVID posed a major threat to the attainment of the SDGs. So how do we become a part of the fight against SDGs? What do you call it? The COVID-19. So we roll out a program to complement government effort. One, the first phase of it was to do our own voluntary contribution among civil society in Ghana. We raised quite substantial amount, and then we decided to reach out to communities and vulnerable groups that were not reached during the partial lockdown in terms of government humanitarian assistance. So we reach out to widows, single mothers, children on the street, and persons with disability, supplying them with food items, or to complement government effort. The second phase is our monitoring of the utilization of public resources. This morning, just before I came into this meeting, we held a virtual meeting to discuss findings of such monitoring report, in which we had a Deputy Minister of Information responding some concerns. The other side has been, how do we get citizens to be part of policy discussions around COVID and post-COVID? So, for example, currently the government is preparing a medium-term, a media budget. How do we get citizens' input into that? So, government is not able to take citizens' input in the way that ordinarily they would have done. So what civil society have done is to play that facilitating role in terms of taking the input, and we have sent it to government. We have issued several statements and policy position papers to them for them to get a sense of what citizens are saying, for which they think must be done in terms of supporting businesses, supporting households that are suffering, supporting frontline health workers, and then also then our advocacy. We kind of prioritize our advocacy to concentrate on the health sector, education sector, social protection, slash poverty reducing interventions. These are the areas that we have concentrated so far as the SDG is concerned, and within the context of COVID, because education, we realize that because many of the education institutions have moved teaching and learning to online platforms, our concern has been to get poor and vulnerable children to have, affordable access, access to internet for them to be able to be part of it. Apparently, many of them are being left behind. And then our advocacy around health is not only about ensuring that there is immediate response to COVID, but also we address systemic challenges that have that COVID has exposed us to. How do we ensure that there is equity in distribution of health infrastructure to ensure that there's equity? I mean, that disparity is addressed. The other thing that we have been working on is, of course, to be part of the government process and government intervention and processes, but also to serve as an independent feedback source to give feedback to government in terms of what citizens' perspectives are and their priorities are. And a lot of the things that are coming up in terms of citizens' priorities based on the consultation that we have done is basically on how to improve delivery of social protection programs. And under the social protection programs, the key issues that are of priority is for government to look at cash transfer, living wages, education, health insurance. And so we have been working with government in terms of providing all this feedback to improve policy design. And at the same time, joining government's effort in creating awareness on protocols that are needed to ensure that we are able to nip the spread of the diseases in the bud. And these are basically how we have been working. But in terms of the downside, the last point I want to make, because I think we have only 1 minute, is that in terms of the structured way that we have been engaging government, that to a lesser extent has been very minimal, because now we can't have face-to-face meetings. We can't have face-to-face meetings because of restrictions on movement and restriction on the number of people who can participate in meetings. So largely, even lectures that we have to send to government, ordinarily they would require hard copy. They are asking us not to even come to the office, but to send, emails. And sometimes it takes a lot of time for them to respond to that. So these are some of the downside, but a lot of the focus and attention are on getting the economy back on stream, getting social protection, deliver services to the vulnerable groups, and ensuring that our health system is resilient enough to respond to the challenges posed by COVID. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George. Thank you so much. Maybe just moving on to the closing remarks, we've identified one question. Caroline will pose the question, and this question will give it to maybe Paul for 1 minute and Oyebesi. So maybe Caroline pose the question, and then we will do our closing remarks.
Okay, thank you very much.
Just hold on, Paul. Caroline, okay. Please ask them the question. We don't seem to hear you, Caroline. Hello, Caroline. We don't seem to hear you. Okay. We don't seem to hear you. Okay, let me just pose the question because we can't seem to hear Caroline. There's a question that has been posed by several participants on issues of South cooperation. So maybe just your views in a minute. how can we advance South-to-South cooperation? What needs to be done in Africa, but also at a global level? Paul, and then maybe Oyebesi, and then we'll move to the closing remarks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, there was a question about how deep can we sink, and at this point it is very difficult to know how deep we can sink. All that we know right now is that whereas the Africa debt is only about 59% of the GDP, which some people say is not really very bad. The problem with Africa's debt is that there is a good part of it which is in the form of Eurobonds, about 157 billion. Now, Eurobond normally comes with conditions that almost makes it impossible for Africa to seek any moratorium on any other debt, and that now is actually the challenge that faces us. I think the second challenge that is facing us, that 80% of global trade has been severely affected by COVID, and Africa primarily is involved in commodity trade. So with that one, it is now becoming extremely difficult for Africa. So we are talking about being able to make face masks. We are talking about our ability to make our own PPEs. But what we really don't know is that these face masks are actually being made by imported parts, because we do not have the parts themselves. So there are countries which are very much affected. So Nigeria, Angola, South Africa, Ivory Coast, Kenya, and Ghana are actually the ones that are headed towards a distress, where by the end of this year, the amount of debt they owe is going to be more than the entire foreign exchange that they have. And this is going to be a very big challenge. So for me, I think that my response to us as civil society is, it is good for us to look at how far are we achieving the SDGs, but as Oyebisi was saying, let us begin to ask ourselves, why are we sitting by as citizens and allowing our governments to gobble up so much debt, and for the IMF to give us so much debt, which is going to make it extremely difficult for us to achieve anything? What does this mean for our South-South cooperation? I really liked the proposal that was made about teaming up together with our counterparts in Latin America. The levels of inequality are very similar to what we have. And so maybe we need to begin looking at how do we begin forming some joint forums and some joint engagement, so that South-South is not just about governments, but South-South is about some joint advocacy that we can have as African civil society. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Oyebesi, please, 1 minute.
I think for me, my suggestion would be that civil society organizations, there's a need for us to organize amongst ourselves, but for us to also have a deeper understanding of how the economy runs and how multilateralism helps our growth as a country. Plus also finding ways of having a South-South cooperation among civil society organizations, excuse me, in ways that we compare notes and that we also reinforce each other's strength, while we also help build each other's weaknesses. We must now deal with evidence-based advocacy, not just sentiments, but also providing alternatives for our governments to be able to function effectively. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Oyebesi, for being brief. Lastly, let's end this session with a closing remark from George Awala. George Awala is the co-chair of the SDGs Kenya Forum, but also the country director of VSO Kenya. Thank you. Over to you, George.
Thank you very much, Florence. Hello, everyone. I hope that you can hear me. We are very grateful that you are able to participate in this event. We are very grateful to the organizers of this event, especially the three entities, the SDGs Kenya Forum, the Civil Society Advanced Forum for Sustainable Development in Nigeria, and also the Civil Society Platform in Ghana. We really do value the the convening power that you have that has enabled us to come and talk about collaboration and how we can work more together in regards to the SDGs. Thank you very much for our great panelists who have really helped us to unpack some of these issues, especially matters around finance for development. We saw Paul and Babatunde really talk eloquently about the politics of finance, the technicalities, the need for innovation. Are we going to look for debt moratorium, or is it forgiveness or balance of trade? Rich perspectives were shared from Latin America, and even in the concluding remarks, we've seen that there needs to be closer collaboration between the South and entities, especially the civil society players, so that we can achieve a lot. Patricia talked about how we can build strong social movements and the momentum. And also just looking at how civil society has responded. We saw Rose Oluoch really talking about how civil society has collaborated closely in Kenya, some of the things that they have done together, and even the research about just how civil society is responding. I think these are really rich things. Asha talked about how we can accelerate the SDGs achievement, especially through collaboration, how we can reset a new button and even respond to the changes. Similar stories we heard from Elizabeth, who was talking about the need to really use the technology that's available, address issues around the digital divide, but not leave behind groups that really need to be incorporated. And really nice that we were able to hear the voices of women, the feminist movement. We were able to also listen to speakers who represented the voice of the youth, like Hatim. Really great, powerful stories about the response and what we can do really to shift socially, because COVID has changed things completely. And we also heard from Madame Egondu, George Osei, and they all talked about the response from a country level and how civil society has really played its role. So we really belong. We have work cut out for us that can enable us to really bring real change within the Sustainable Development Platform, working with government so that they can prioritize development at the national level, but even going deeper to the districts, the counties, or the provinces, depending on how your state is organized. But looking for experiences from elsewhere. And that's why this forum was really a great forum, because it brought perspectives from across maybe 3 different continents for people to talk about what their experiences are at national level, at regional level, and maybe the global level in terms of influencing policy and bringing the voices of the most marginalized to the table. So indeed, thank you very much. We really value the moderation that has also been done by Davis and Florence. We appreciate. And thank you very much for finding time to be part of this wonderful gathering and the learning and the rich experiences that we have received. So back to you, Florence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George. And yes, I won't add anything. George has done the closing remarks. So thank you all. And it was nice for you all to join us. And this conversation has to continue. It has to continue. Thank you. And bye.
Thank you. Okay, let's keep engaging.
Okay. Just maybe unmute and say bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay,
Thank you very much.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thank you all. Bye. Stay safe.
Keep well. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Let's